about something that a lot of people like, and that's outlaws and in-laws.
Let them know where we're at.
Yeah, we're up here at Moon Lake, or not Moon Lake, we're on the Mountain Home Lodge on the way to Moon Lake. Greg Gardner's our good friend, and he's graciously allowed us to come up here and film Dan. And
It's not my fault.
it's beautiful surroundings and settings, and if you're up this way and need a place to stay, book a room or come up and visit the Moon Lake. He leases that up there too. So anyway, we're going to talk about the outlaw Jesse James. A lot of people like to talk about Jesse James, but honestly, not a lot of people know really about Jesse James, or they think they do, but they don't.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a big mess that's been created ever since the end of the Civil War. The thing that fueled it the most is everything that was designed to keep you from understanding and knowing what the Civil War was actually all about. And if the true history were told, people would start to understand and see that Jesse James was actually a national hero, not a gun-slinging, highfalutin, tooting cowboy that went around and shot everybody up. We didn't kill somebody unless they needed killing. I like to call him the James Bond of the Civil War.
Well, what's interesting is if the Civil War was today, I'd have a hell of a hard time picking a side, but I'd lean towards states' rights just like they did, because that's what the Constitution outlines, you know. Everything not specifically given to the federal government is reserved for the states.
Well, there's a lot of people that would doubt anything other than what we've been told the Civil War was all about. But let's put a little common sense into this, okay? Jesse James's right-hand man was an escaped black slave, okay? And he stuck with him his entire life. He even came forward in the end of his times to validate that that's who he is. He is absolutely Jesse James. And two of his other black friends came forward also, and they're in a photograph. And a little common sense here, do you really think that the Southerners sat there and watched their churches boarded up, lit on fire, and their families burned to death, all because they wouldn't let their slave go?
Yeah.
Does that make any sense to you? That's not what it was about. It was about keeping the world bankers out of our financial system.
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot to it.
Yeah, that's true. That's a deeper thing that most people realize.
Well, that's not in the history books.
Yeah, no, they conveniently left that out.
Well, the people who pay the writers are the very ones who are trying to come in to get into our financial system. World bankers.
And it's the same people trying to run things today.
Mm-hmm.
Same people.
Same families.
Same people that are pissed off at Trump and all the rest of us that want our freedoms.
Let's not go there or we get some pissed off.
We'll have to cut that out.
Yeah.
It makes us feel better to put it in right now. Anyhow, all right, we're on to Jesse James. Dan, tell us a little bit about the history of it, and then I'll ask some questions about what.
Well,
let's start with the obvious question. You mentioned earlier when we were down at the cafe, you said, well, you asked me, well, which Jesse James?
yeah. To begin with, there was actually 4 Jesse Jameses. One of them never, and they were related. One of them never participated in any kind of conflicts such as Jesse Woodson James. And that's the one that we're here to talk about today, and a little bit about his cousin, his first cousin, Jesse Robert James. The third Jesse James was killed by, quote unquote, the damned Yankees. And that helped fuel the fire behind Jesse and what he did. And then we have Jesse Woodson James and we have Jesse Robert James. And they were first cousins. And when you hear the stories about Jesse James did this and Jesse James did that, in some of those instant cases, both Jesses were involved. When somebody came forward in latter years and they said, well, my family knew Jesse James. Well, which one? Was it Jesse Robert or Jesse, you know? But the biggest conflict in all of this is Jesse James went down in history as a murderous, cold-blooded killer, yeah. And, you know, robbed stagecoaches, stole from old men, old women. You know, they really made him look bad. But if you've ever heard of the Black Book, or the actual title of the book is Jesse James with one of his names, it's a book I would highly recommend, no matter what you believe, but I would suggest you take the book a little more serious than most people do.
I'm going to put a plug in for you right there. It's hard to find that book, so if you go to Dan's website...
Not anymore.
It's not anymore. But I mean, if you go to your website, you can find a link to get the book.
Amazon.com, and I finally got tired of paying $500 to $1,000 a copy for it, so actually did a little bit of research and decided that we had a clear go on it, and I reprinted it. So.
Okay. So they can go to Tescoro.com and find it, or they can go to Amazon and just look up Jesse James' Black Book and it'll come up.
But no, go to the blog site and go look under books for sale, because there's other books.
Oh, yeah.
No, forget Amazon. He didn't say that.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, so we're on the Jesse Woodson James today, and a lot of the people out there might be related to one of the other Jesse James and know they were related to Jesse James and not know which one. So it's good to know.
Well, it's just like I was telling you before. I worked with a guy in South Dakota, in Aiken, and he said that he was a descendant of Jesse James, but I don't know which one. Right. You know, back then I knew Jesse James, that there was only one. Right. You know, I didn't.
Me too.
You give me some names, and I could probably find out.
I'll just think what his name was.
But let me tell you how this got started. I mean, I've always been a little bit of a fan of Jesse James. I've always kind of liked that kind of thing, Billy the Kid, you know, from watching movies as a kid. And, yeah, I was one of those kids where mom had to come up and turn the TV off and say, it's time to go to bed.
Yeah.
Where you actually had to walk to the TV and turn it off?
Yes. Or you get the remote, your little brother. Yeah. I had someone come to me, I'm going to guess it's been at least 8 years ago, someone came to me and they said, you know, Dan, kind of admire the way you went and assess situations and seem to have the ability to read between the lines, etc. And I'd like to know if you'd be willing to assess a book for me. I said, sure, why not? And so he sent me the book. To this day, I can't remember who it was. And I'm wondering if I ever reported back to him. But anyway.
That was a Black Book?
Yeah. So I started reading through this book, and I thought, wow, there's some pretty incredible claims in here. But by nature, as I'm reading it, I'm asking myself, well, can I prove that? Can I disprove it? You know, I didn't have a motive. Either it's true or it isn't true. And the more I read through that book, I thought, wow, this could be quite a project. I was being sucked into it. I was drawn to it. And so I started keeping record of statements and incidences that took place. You know, I'd highlight them in yellow, and that's something I'd come back to later and see if I could prove or disprove it. There's some things that I read that I knew there was no way in hell I'd be able to prove it or disprove it either way. But what it's come down to this day, I haven't been able to disprove anything. I have not been able to find a lie. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I haven't been able to disprove anything in the book. I have, however, been able to prove many things throughout the book, and I've got other things that's just sitting on the fence. You know, we can't prove it, we can't disprove it. And so it's become one of my fastest growing projects, and I love doing it. It's fun. what I'm trying to do behind the scenes is straighten out the genealogy of Jesse James, because it's so freaking screwed up because of the BS that's been put out. Right. We can say that on camera, BS. Huh?
Yeah. Everybody wants to be related to somebody, and so
I got another guy that does interviews now and then, and I've been banned from using the SHIT word. So.
Shit.
Yeah, that one.
My channel has all kinds of good words on it.
I'm pretty colorful.
I never have figured out what's so terrible about the word.
Well, you know, the Aztecs, they loved that word. Gold was holy shit. That was the gift of the gods. They worshipped it. Okay, back to James.
But anyway, he knows who he is. He'll get a kick out of that. But the big controversy with Jesse James is did he fake his death in 1882? Right. And my personal opinion, based on everything I've read and seen, he absolutely did. And he faked his death a few other times too. But the most difficult part was to get to know and understand the face of Jesse James, because if you get on Google search window and you go and type in Jesse James, you'll come up pictures of Frank James. Mm-hmm. There's two Frank Jameses. There's Alexander Franklin James, which is the son of, what's her name? Zerelda.
Yeah.
Zerelda and Samuel, I think it was.
Sebastian. Did you say Sebastian?
Samuel.
Oh, Samuel.
Samuels.
Oh.
I can't remember his first name. Anyway, but the traditional parents that are attributed to Jesse James, they were the parents of Jesse Robert James, not Jesse Woodson. Mm-hmm. And that's why we have all that controversy over an old record, entry where somebody crossed out the W or crossed out the R and put a W. Because they didn't know.
Some helpful librarian or historian or something.
Yeah, somebody that thought, oh, well, they got that wrong, not knowing who Jesse Robert James is. And but that's where all the controversy is did he fake his death? And he most certainly did. And I don't have to say that I have found proof. Once you see the evidence, it's been proven to you too.
One thing that appeals to me about that is if you think about his life and what he went through and all the things, you realize why he would want to do that.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely.
I mean, if you were a figure in that day and age that went through the Civil War and was a hit list for the North and everything else, you know exactly why.
Well, if you had a, I don't even know what his reward was, $5,000 dead or alive. Right. Well, yeah, you want to fake your death. $5 grand is a lot of money back then.
Yeah, one of them was 10 grand.
Yeah.
When he faked
that's
his death.
that's equivalent of what? Probably $1 million today almost.
Didn't the railroad put out a bounty on him at one time?
I think pretty much everybody had a bounty on him.
The railroads.
He was criminalized by one of his former friends who became pretty big in the railroad industry, and he cost him a lot of money. And because the reason he targeted railroads, banks, etc., is because that hit the world bankers, okay, or the union. Right? Those were his targets. He wasn't out robbing stagecoaches with private money, unless, of course, the guy owned the railroad or was part of it.
Well, the other thing about the Jesse James thing that gets me is if you really know the history, he was trying to raise money so the South could rise again, or so they could continue the fight for states' rights.
I doubted that for a while, but the more I got into it, the evidence was clear that, they were trying to build themselves up to go into a second civil war. The historians came in and started adding to that, saying that, they wanted to annex in, the whole of Mexico and bring Mexico in as part of the South. And that's BS. There's absolutely no evidence behind it whatsoever.
Mexico, if I remember history correctly, had just fought against the United States in the Alamo.
They just wanted a place where the world bankers didn't have their fingers into our money. Isn't that why we left England in when we got our independence in 1776? Now those very same people were trying to come in and reestablish themselves just like they had us over in England. And I personally believe it was the reading of the 14th Amendment, which is what caused the 7 congressmen to walk out of Congress that day, sign a die, which means without setting a day to reconvene. If that happens by law, Congress ceases to exist.
Yes.
And they have to start over. Yeah. They have to re-elect all the congressmen. I think it wipes out the presidency, everything. Mm-hmm. And then we could go into the assassination of Abraham Lincoln and who may have actually done it and who might have been involved and why they did it. Lincoln's the only one that could have overturned everything that happened because of his idiocy in bringing in the world bankers into our country.
In fact, he said on a couple of occasions, he said that, you know the quote better than I do. What was it that he said?
The quote, I'll paraphrase.
Yeah.
I think I'll get it.
It'd be closer to what I'd get.
Before me, I have the Confederacy, which I loathe, and behind me, okay, we have the bankers, whom I fear.
Right.
And he says, I have destroyed the Republic. Okay, he just admitted that he created a committed treason.
Yeah.
I have destroyed the Republic in order to save the Union.
Right.
Okay, what's the Union?
Well, it was the states.
Union was, a united thing between the various states, right? Well, he wanted to keep them all together. Well, so what if some of them went this way and, X amount went this way? Who cares? Mm-hmm. So we were not under attack by any foreign nation at the time, so the Union was not the concern. The Republic, on the other hand, is our way of government. And that's treason.
Well, at that point, from that point on, we could have a whole discussion, but in reality, didn't we go to a corporation of the United States of America?
Yeah, in 1871.
Later, but
years later.
Yeah, but this is what started that process.
Right, and it was the process building up to infiltrating, basically taking over our fiat system, and eventually render it
neutered.
Getting rid of gold and silver as our backing, okay?
Paper money.
And once they get rid of the gold and silver as our backing, and they had to have a reason to do that, okay?
Right.
Then they brought us in, and they went to the American people and said, oh, gee, now that they've got all the gold and silver behind them,
that's good.
We're facing bankruptcy. We really need the American people's support right now.
Right.
And so here's what we're going to propose. We're going to confiscate the assets of the American people, okay? But in exchange, because they got to pay attention to that Constitution,
right?
In exchange, we're going to give you the unlimited ability to discharge all of your debt. And then they forgot to tell us how to do it.
Right.
So what they've done is they've turned us into chateau. Okay, we are the commodity. You, I, all of us. We are the backing of the U.S. dollar. Okay, it's not gold and silver anymore. There's some people actually don't know that. But and it's based on future value. Okay, for example, you're born, they create the bond, which is your birth certificate.
You get a social security number, which is your corporation
which
number.
is the Cestacate Trust. It's attached to it. And that's how they access it your whole life. Every time you go to court, every time you get married,
Borrow money.
borrow money, especially in a car or a home,
Right.
And you're going to have people out there that are going,
Huh? What are you talking about?
that's not the way it is. You know, and they want you to believe that paying income taxes supports this country. And it's BS. Not one damn dime of your income tax goes to support this country. So, but
Let
anyway,
me check this counter real quick, make sure our SD card's holding out and everything.
you do that.
Looks good so far.
Just bought a camera.
This is just a cheap one. I was
Mine's
getting a
a
big
cheap one, too.
a Canon, but me and John, I ran it at the campfire for an hour. Me and John was shooting the fat and talking treasure, and I didn't have the mic turned on. It was silent video, so I got the mic on.
Just have to have somebody.
Yeah, during the video, just have somebody doing that. Dub it over, and
Yeah.
they would have to. There would be some leaps. Right, John or Dan, we're on to the Jesse
So-
James. Let's talk about some of the things that he did do.
Well, let's go to the when he faked his death.
Sure. Absolutely.
And to me, this is one of the most fascinating things about it. And whether it's true or not, you can assess for yourself. But take a good hard look at the pictures in the black book. And see, and I didn't know any of this before I got into the black book. I didn't know Jesse faked his death. I didn't know that he was killed in 1885. I didn't know any of this. And it's just, when I read the story, nothing added up. Now, I've never been to the little house that they claim he was killed in and seen the bullet holes in the wall, but I've been told by several people, and maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, they said it's a very low ceiling. Okay, the story is that Jesse took his guns off and put them down on the table, pulled the chair over, got on the chair to fix this picture on the wall. Okay, home sweet home, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, first off, Jesse, even though he was about 5'9", probably could have touched the ceiling with his finger. Okay, why did he need a chair? Just little things like that started coming up, and so I read the whole story in the black book as to what Jesse says went down. And when I say what Jesse said, it's via his grandson.
Mm-hmm.
So he's quoting what he's heard Jesse say, supposedly, okay? And he spent most of his life living with Jesse.
Was Billy the Kid killed before Jesse James?
No, Billy died after, just a few years later.
Because
If the book is
their
true.
assassination stories were slightly similar, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
you could wonder,
Well, the biggest problem is, and this is true with Jesse James also, the pictures that have gone down in history as being Billy the Kid and Jesse James, they're not the right. It's not Jesse and it's not Billy.
Billy was a handsome looking feller.
Well,
I'm joking.
Yeah.
I'm joking.
You know,
Well, that one picture that the guy found at a yard sale or whatever, a bunch of glass pictures, and that was, they were playing croquet. And that was
but look at
supposed
the
to be-
picture they're comparing to.
Yeah.
It's not Billy the Kid. Okay, and I'm pretty sure we have the same problem with Jesse. But we were able to find, because we know what Frank James looked like. Now this is Sylvester Franklin James, Jesse Woodson James's brother. His mother was Molly Dalton. His father was George Struthers James. Okay, so we have pictures of him because there was no secret. He came out. He was exonerated, whatever, and lived to be old. We know what he looks like. So we have pictures of Sylvester Franklin James. So we're able to compare to older or younger pictures, okay? Plus we have younger pictures that are confirmed, okay? I mean, I'm trying to remember her name, Annalee Dillenbeck. She was a charcoal artist. Yeah. And I don't know why, actually I do, why she was so dead set on doing charcoal drawings of all of the, as many as she knew, Quantrill's Raiders. See, she lived there in Missouri along with them, and there's a connection there somehow, and I haven't found it yet. But she obviously knew these people, and even the experts won't, so-called experts, won't argue with you that this one picture is Jesse standing on the right. Sylvester Franklin James is sitting in the middle, and then something Travis is standing on the other side. But anyway, you can compare these photos. So we know what Frank James looked like. Sylvester Franklin, okay? Or Dr. Frank, okay? Well, there was a photo that was found in the area, in an old cabin at Bottomless Lake in New Mexico. And I don't know how they discovered who it was. Maybe it was written on the picture. I don't know. It had Frank, Jesse, and their mother. So now we have a photo that we can pretty much assume is Jesse James. And I think the reason that this has become easy for me, if it has, is because Jesse looks just like my older brother. I mean, you take my brother George, who passed away a few years ago, and you put him next to Jesse James, and you'd almost swear they're the same person. And so there's a familiarity there that
You recognize.
may not be there for other people. I don't know. Well, anyhow, so that's where it really started getting going. In the Black Book, it tells the story about, from the Black Book's point of view, Jesse's point of view, how they came in and they planned a night to go in and kill Charlie Bigelow and his two brothers because they were the primary individuals who were out doing robberies that they wouldn't do, and they killed, a couple of people here, and then they'd put it out there that it was Jesse James and his group. And I don't want to go too much into it because I don't want to kill it for the people that want to actually read the book. It's interesting, very interesting. Anyhow, after they killed the Bigelow brothers and Charlie Bigelow and got the body set up where they wanted it and everything, Jesse says, I'll be right back, and I'm going to take off and go change my clothes, and when I come back, I'm going to be the elegant Captain Harrison Trow. Now, this is only the second time this name has ever showed up. The first time was Jesse when he was working, it's in a census record, and he was 19 years old at the Hudspeth farm working as a farmhand. Okay, I may have said that name wrong, but soon. So obviously he had used the name before that point, but at this point he's Captain Harrison Trow, who was appointed by Governor Crittenden to do the investigation of the killing of Jesse James. Jesse was killed. Messengers were sent to the next city, which was 30 minutes away. Another 30 minutes, the sheriffs came back, okay? 15 minutes before they got back, Harrison Trow's on the scene. Harrison Trow, according to the records, lived over 60 miles away. Governor Crittenden lived 90 miles away. So how did Governor Crittenden get a message to Captain Harrison Trow, and Captain Harrison Trow just happened to be in the neighborhood? Oh, Jesse's been shot, what, 10 minutes ago? And so he's on the scene and takes control of the whole situation. He was dressed, when he went and pulled a roll off his saddlebag. What do you guys call it? You're an outfitter.
A lariat?
No, a roll. Where you roll your shit.
Bedroll?
Bedroll, I guess.
Yeah.
He had a military uniform in there, so he shows up on the scene in this gaudy-looking military uniform to take over. And later, it's put into history that he actually rode with Fondrell's Raiders at one time. And it wasn't Captain Harrison Trow that rode with him, it was Jesse James. So when I read this story, I'm thinking, God, if I could just get a good, reliable picture of Jesse James and a good, reliable picture of Captain Harrison Trow, I'll bet you money they looked just like each other. So I did search after search after search. And eventually, I come to know and believe that that picture I mentioned was found at Bottomless Lake. Incidentally, this is about 150 miles away from over 8,000 acres that Captain Harrison Trow used to own.
Hmm.
Okay,
Wow.
it's
Well,
a little
yeah.
close. And lo and behold, I found a picture of Captain Harrison Trow, but it was an older picture. You know, I wasn't really satisfied with it. I looked at it, I thought, yeah, it could be Jesse, but it's just not good enough. Had I thought at the time to do a point dot alignment and do an opacity change, I would have been surprised, but I didn't even think to do that.
Mhm.
And then eventually I found a charcoal drawing that Anna Lee did. And when I first looked at it, I thought, holy crap, and I put them side by side. Other than Captain Harrison Trow's cheeks are a little bit buffed out, it's obvious it's the same person. So I thought, oh my God, this story's true. And it wasn't just that validated the truthfulness of him faking his death. There's many other things, like, okay, here we have J. Frank Dalton sitting on his deathbed wearing his hat. He's leaning up in his hospital bed, I think it was. We got John Trammell there. This is like 1948. John Trammell's there. They indicated that at that time, John Trammell was 117 years old. Then we got Lucky Johnson and one other guy. They're all three are black guys. Why are these three black guys there, knowing what J. Frank Dalton is claiming, and they are supporting him?
Yeah.
Why would they do that? If the South was just so cruel to the black people, then why weren't these guys killing him?
Well, Jesse also had some good Native American sidekicks at play in
Native Americans, Mexicans, Indian, and the black people, they loved Jesse James, okay, because he took good care of them. I would suggest anybody who reads the book, read through some of the affidavits that are included in the book, and there's actually hundreds of them, but of course they didn't have that much room in the book.
In some of another angle of this, the Sioux dialect or petroglyphs are what tie into some of these mystery glyphs or some of these potential Jesse James
That's
glyphs.
something I personally believe. I'm not sure Terry Carter
Is that something you want to put
but-
out there? Or
What's that?
is that something you want to put out there, or is that something for another video?
Personally, I believe it is.
I do too.
Well, I heard there wasn't there a professor from UCLA or somewhere in Cali, and he said that it was a dialect of the Sioux.
The Jibble.
Oh, I know what you're saying. Okay,
Yeah.
the glyphs that they call the mystery glyphs, there's no ands, ifs, or buts about it. It is Sioux Ojibwa hieroglyphs, no question. Okay, this isn't a theory. But what it comes down to for me, and me and Terry's talked about this many times, and I think he can see what I'm talking about. And I don't know what his conclusion is on
Right.
this. That's Terry's thing. But we have very good reason to believe that these were carved, cut, packed, carved, whatever, sometime in the late 1800s, possibly even into the early 1900s. So I sit back and I think, okay, who could it be? What organization would it be carving Sioux Ojibwa hieroglyphs during that time frame?
It obviously had a message for somebody.
Yeah, and they're always found in a difficult place. It's not along the trail, you're going to be riding along on your horse one day and, oh, hey, great, let's stop reading.
Well, the Sioux aren't even native to the areas where the glyphs have been found. They're
From Idaho and further
Midwest,
Yeah, all the western states. Well, I'm reading through the Black Book, and I read this one statement where a reporter was asking Jesse, or J. Frank Dalton, do you still remember the hieroglyphs that you carved and, for whatever purpose along the way? And he says, oh, absolutely I do.
Is that in the Black Book?
Yeah, and he said, in fact, a lot of people mistake them for Native American petroglyphs. And that was the first clue.
Yeah.
And I'm reading through another part, and they're talking about these depositories. Because, you know, I'm sorry, I'm drawn to that kind of thing. Gold doesn't excite me, but silver does. I like silver. Okay? Well, anyway, I'm reading through this, and Jesse makes the statement that these depositories are all over the West. I'm thinking, okay, he was in Missouri, you know, why didn't he mention the central states? He said they're all over the West. And that's when, you know, bells and whistles went off in my head. Holy shit.
Well, in that day and age, if you wanted to hide something, the West was the place to do it.
Oh, yeah.
And that ties into the thing that the guy found out there by Fillmore.
What about Doc Noss?
Doc Noss, yeah.
We know that was a KGC cache. And it tells the story in the Black Book about Maximilian and how Maximilian survived and lived out the rest of his days, and how they went to England or wherever she was and picked up Carlotta. And in the Doc Noss cave, it was documented that there was a crown found in there, and the old Wells Fargo box that it was in said Carlotta's things.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
No, he had a few alibis that he used.
Okay. After that killing of Charlie Bigelow, who was killed and passed off as Jesse James.
Hang on. Let me check my camera. This is the good stuff.
Okay, but nobody knew what Jesse looked like.
Right.
Unless you were a personal friend.
So what about all the wanted posters? What picture did they use?
That's what I'd like to know, because the picture they used was not, I don't think it's Jesse. And yes, it looks a little bit like him in his younger years, and it could be him. I just don't think it is. I compare him to young pictures of Captain Harrison Trow, which I have two of them. But you got to remember, there is no Captain Harrison Trow. It's Jesse James.
Right. Well, so on the alibis, that came about after his fake death. He had to have some alibis.
Well, they put him
operate or remove.
Yeah, this is the photo that I'm familiar with of Jesse.
Yeah, that's the second most common.
Okay,
That one there, in
and
my
is that
opinion,
Frank?
absolutely is not Jesse James. And there was never a $25,000 reward.
So this is probably a fake poster.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of those. So, shortly thereafter, him and Myra Bell get married. They don't get married under the name of Jesse James and Myra Bell, because Myra Bell was wanted too.
Yeah.
She operated for a time under the name of Belle Starr.
Bella Star.
In order to get her off the hook, they had to create another Belle Starr. And that's why the historians to this day can't seem to get the two images. You know, sometimes they actually use them together and go, oh yeah, here's a couple pictures of Belle Starr. They're clearly not the same person. Myra Bell had a round head, okay? And Belle Starr had this skinny face. And, I mean, they're obviously not the same person. And I think the organization, being the Confederate Underground, I think they did this purposely and set up Belle Starr and killed her. And so as far as government or anybody that would be looking for Myra Bell, no longer looking for her because she's dead, right? Okay, same thing with Jesse. They faked her death too. Her and Jesse got married at that point. But they did it under the name of Captain Harrison Trow and Missouri Ann. Missouri Ann Jesse. Okay. And both of them lived out pretty much the rest of their lives up till 1925. I think Missouri Ann, a.k.a. Myra Bell, I think she may have died I don't see any reason why they would fake this, but I think she died about 1935. She was looking pretty old in the 1920 photo that showed up in, and it's still there. You can go in and see
In
it.
that visitors, or that museum.
Yeah, museum down in Hereford, Texas, of all places. But what I've come to find out is that Jesse went to Texas after all of that and lived out his life as, well, for 25 years under the name of Captain Harrison Trow. In that photo, somebody called me. I can't remember who it was, and said, you know, I went to this museum down in, I was looking for pictures of Captain Harrison Trow, so I was putting the feelers out. Somebody got hold of me and they said, you know, I was down at this museum down in Hereford, Texas, and then we saw this photo hanging on the wall, and it had Captain Harrison Trow. And I said, did it by chance have his wife also? And they said, I think so. So I contacted this place, and there's this kind younger lady that works there, and she was more than willing to go take pictures for me and whatever and send them to me.
That's cool.
So I get these pretty good high quality photos back from her, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, holy crap, that is. You know, I knew it was Harrison Trow, but zoomed in on it, that's Jesse James. And I thought, where's Belle Starr? Or not Belle Starr, but Myra Bell. She's right there. Holy shit, there's his mom. There's his dad. What's his dad doing in there? His dad was killed in 1862. No, he wasn't. And so right off the bat, there's 4 people that are supposed to be dead. Yeah, there's 4 people, and they're all still alive. Well, I can't say that about Molly because we don't know. So at least 3 people that were supposed to be dead, and here they are in a 1920 photo. And the people in Hereford, Texas don't know it. They have no idea. There's another picture that showed up that we suspect is a picture of Jesse and Myra Bell's actual children. Okay? Now, some have made up their mind that it's Jesse and Frank. And the 2 girls, just, you know, the girlfriends and the wives. The more I looked at it, I thought, no, this is not Jesse. These are his kids. And I thought, I wonder. So I go back to the Hereford photo and pull it up, and I start comparing them. And that's him. You know, and that's this guy, and this one here. One of the girls, I can't tell. There's 2 girls left in that photo, and honestly, it could be either one of them. And that's speculation. Okay, as far as the kids go, I don't have anything to back it up. I only know the names they were using when they were in Hereford, Texas. What year was it? 1925. Jesse sees the need to kill off Captain Harrison Trow. A week later, he kills off William A. Clark. Now, Jesse didn't have to, you know, I've left very little room for you to ask questions.
It's all right. I've got plenty of them to talk about.
Okay. Jesse did not personally attend to the persona William A. Clark. He had a double, okay? And he had other doubles too for other purposes, but I haven't really found any of those yet. The double who, if you was to look up William A. Clark, the man you're going to be looking at is Carl O. Clark, okay? And he lived over in, I think it's Death Valley. I've got his death date and everything. Just like the Black Book said, sure enough, he lived there and died there. And the only thing we haven't been able to do yet, or me, is find an actual photo of Carl O. Clark as Carl O. Clark. Because then I could compare that picture to William A. Clark.
Well, the William Clark thing fascinates me because when we get into the Jesse James site that's west of Cedar City, I'm not going to give the exact location, but one of the key ways Jesse signed his name was the backwards JJ, and then some of the other,
along with the Mason
symbol, and that other, there's some AL and some of the other people there.
To me, it's not KGC, it's one of
His
Jesse's
personal phrase.
Yeah.
Well, when I saw that site, I was like, if this really is him, there's got to be a reason or event that why he was in that area.
Right.
And so I was like, what was in the area at the time he would have been there? And lo and behold, I start thinking, well, it has to be either Nevada, because they got a lot of mines there in the railroad, or it has to be somewhere in Utah. And I found Silver Reef. Lo and behold, I found an old article where it talked about this gambler, William Clark, who came to town suddenly and then got in this shootout with another guy and stole a bunch of money and then booked it out of town. And they found out later he was trying to figure out how to steal the payroll.
Who was the payroll for?
For the miners, that they would take the gold and
Who
silver.
owned the mines?
There were various people. There was several mine owners.
People that were tied in with the union, or
They were what the Mormons who lived in St. George would call them were heathen bastard miners, quote unquote.
Well, because see, Jesse was a friend
Right.
to the Mormons.
Right. These were not Mormons. The Mormons did not want them there because they were bringing bad influences.
Well, they were
gambling, booze.
Can you give me a copy of that?
Yeah, I can.
I really want
But the dates and everything are so damn close to the time period that I would attest or would assume that other was that I was like, there has to be a tie, and his name was William Clark.
Only someone from Montana and Arizona would know just how much Jesse James, under that name, was in Arizona. I mean, Clark County was named after him, Clarksville, Clarksdale.
What's interesting
Some of the
too
mines down there.
is some of the mystery glyph sites, St. George, Enterprise, they're close there.
Yeah, St. George is the odd one, but I think I found the other reason.
Yeah.
Usually the glyphs will show up, and this is why so-called historians have attributed these writings to Mormons. You know, Mormons did it.
Right.
You've done the research, and you can't count how many times they blame it on the Mormons. Okay, trying to perpetuate their religion. You know. Yes.
Check camera real quick. I think it's.
So what about the glyphs by, Mr. Glyphs by Lake Powell? Now, what would that be?
What mystery glyphs?
There's supposed to be, there's one video of his where somebody had told him they were
Those
both
are Egyptian glyphs.
Oh, maybe that's
They
what it
actually
was.
do look like the
Yeah.
Egyptian glyphs. And trust me, it doesn't mean Egyptians were here.
That's somebody that knew that.
Egyptians were too damn lazy to get off their front porch. However, there was a people who came here in 600 BC who was fully educated and versed in the language of the Egyptians.
And Hebrew as well.
We called them Hebrews. Okay?
They lived in Egypt for 400 years.
That
So
was
you
their
think
first-
they knew
That was
Egyptian?
their first written language.
That's right.
And a reformed Egyptian. Now, that picture you're referring to was not a reformed Egyptian, it was Egyptian. Reformed Egyptian would be Native American.
That's what was mixed in with that Hebrew and with the
No,
Egyptian.
it's not mixed in with it. Hebrew is a separate thing, but it's been found also. Anyway, let's not go back.
Okay.
Let me finish what I was saying about St. George. Okay. I'm going to say almost every one of the Mr. Glyph sites that's been documented so far, you'll find is near a railroad, a mining area. It's usually in a place that's hard to see, hard to get to. You're not just going to be walking down the road. Oh, hey, look, we got some Mr. Glyphs. Now, the one in St. George, you would think defies that, but who knew these crazy people were going to go down there and build a temple in a swamp
And start raising cotton and call it Dixie.
Yeah.
Because it reminded them of the South.
And piss some people off in the future and make them start changing their names. Stupid. Where do you think Dixie came from? Do you think there might have been a little southern, what's the word I'm looking for, influence there?
Right.
I wonder where it come from. Well, St. George is one of the exceptions. There isn't a railroad close by.
Yeah, I was going to say
There's
no
a
railroad
railroad.
in there.
But out there by that other site that we're talking about a little bit, there is a railroad that runs out there.
Oh, yeah.
To the iron
The ones north of there.
And that was all going on at the same time.
Okay, but find something else. Jesse was very much into utilities also. He wasn't just into railroads, he was into streetcars and that kind of thing. Utilities, electricity, whatever. Well, I was reading an article. I've got these manuals. They're, like 100 years old. What they do is they keep a record of all the corporations that existed at the time. You go look up trust companies, banks, find out who the corporate officers were, railroads, etc. I think it's called Coors.
Coors magazine and
the word Moody. But anyway, I can find it on the computer. And I find this company called, I was looking up the name William A. Clark. And I find this company called Dixie Power.
Yeah.
And what? It wasn't just Dixie Power. It's like, where'd the name Dixie come from?
Yeah.
Of course, you hear that song in your head. Oh, I wish it wasn't Dixie. Well, so I started looking up the corporate people involved, and I'm comparing the names to the trust company that it was associated with in Salt Lake, and there were some of the same names, and somehow I ended up finding a link with William A. Clark. But there was this one corporate member whose name was, anyway, the KGC buffs out there, they'll know who I'm talking about. Albert Pike.
Albert. Yes,
He'd been dead for 10 years. And yes, there could be other people named Albert Pike, and this could be a strange coincidence, but it's
when you add up all these other things,
Jesse was in the habit of using the names of those who he admired and had passed on, such as his cousin, I think it was his cousin, could have been an uncle, J. Frank Dalton, who was killed many years prior. So was this a little bit of a tribute to Albert Pike? It's not proof, okay, by any means, but it gave St. George location a little something else to go on. There is mining in the area. There just wasn't a railroad.
well, most people are not familiar with the Silver Reef mine and how rich it was, and it wasn't until, they were shipping millions of dollars worth of silver to Nevada to be processed till they got their own. But when the war came in, and when the price of silver dropped, it was too expensive to keep mining the silver, and so Silver Reef went away. All right, he had a picture there of Jesse James that the railroad put out in a lawn.
Looks like an original one. I can zoom in.
That's the photo that's most commonly used.
But this is different from that other picture I just showed you.
Yes, it is different. The other one is the second most common.
Right.
Do you think this is him, though, the railroad?
I really don't. I have yet to do a point dot comparisons of that photo and the picture that I know beyond a shadow of a doubt is Jesse James, and I haven't even told you why I know that. I gave you part of it, because it has Frank James, well known.
And his mother.
But his mother's not well known either.
Right.
But Frank's image is, but there's other reasons why I know it's Jesse James too, and it's mainly because of a picture that was sent to me not too many years ago. I'm still trying to get it. I want that photo. Or a professional copy of it. And when I received the email, I was thinking, her story was fantastic, and it was linked to Lee Hawk and so forth. And so I thought, well, there's got to be something to this. And I said, sure, send the photos. I'd like to see them. She sent them to me, and I opened it up, and I looked at it for just a second, and I was about ready to hit the old delete button, and holy crap, that's Jesse James and Frank. There's no question. If you've seen them, you know exactly what I mean. You can see them on the last article that I posted on Tuscaro.com. I just have been busy for quite some time now and trying to keep the wolves away from the door, and I haven't done much.
I have a question about, so we know the mystery glyphs are Ojibwa Sioux. So how come, has anybody translated them?
I tried. I can
I mean,
I
with AI now, I think it's going to really help us out.
I can only think of a few people who are capable of that. And some of them are going to be some old die-hard Sioux Ojibwa people.
Mhm.
And whether they can or they can't, I don't know. And then there's this other guy that you and I know that has been involved in studying the Native American petroglyphs for the last 35 years.
Mhm.
That can give you an idea of certain symbols in there based upon the very writing system that it comes from, which is your typical Native American petroglyph, or what I like to call Reformed Egyptian. Okay? And those glyphs, original source is the same original source here.
Mhm.
They just have different rules, kind of like Egyptian has the same roots as Native American petroglyphs. Don't care whether you believe it or not.
They build on each other.
Not each other. One comes from the other.
Well, yeah, but I mean their root.
The root is what we would call Native American petroglyphs, or, in my opinion, Reformed Egyptian.
One really interesting thing, years ago, long before I knew you guys or Terry Smith or seen the mystery glyphs, I was guiding a hunt on the Manti. And we were down in the canyon, and I found a big white rock that was, to me, it looked like an altar. So I walked up to it because it was huge, and it obviously rolled off the top somewhere because where the white rock was. I went over there and it had a bunch of, I thought gibberish.
And you still haven't been back.
I haven't been back, but in my mind, that's what they were, is the same glyphs. What was really interesting, I had a client with me, so I couldn't do much. But all the trees that were around there was a big grove of really, really big trees. Somebody had dug looking for something at the base of every one of those trees about 100 yards away from where that panel was.
If it's what we think, they're not going to find it.
No, I don't think so either. But I still want to go back there with the metal detector and take some photos.
Would value with power. Get on his ASS and get his butt back down there, because he told me about this. I'll bet you 10 years.
I know. I tried to get you to go with me
And
one time.
oh, sure. Get Dan to go. Yeah, this guy that broke his safe from him.
I don't want to say on video, but it's on the Manti Mountain. It's a great mountain, but it's if I were to describe it, somewhere
fairly easy.
It's not easy. You got ATVs, and that's
I don't know.
a little high.
If I put Tracy within a couple miles of it, he'd be there. In
Tracy could find it too. Any of you guys can find it. Like, I can tell you where it is. But what really fascinated me was every tree within 100 yards into the trees from where that was, they dug a pit. I knew it was old because you know how you can tell a new within 20 years. It was way beyond 20 years old.
I still remember where it is, and I can probably find it on Google Earth. But you really need to go get
Check it
photos.
back out. I know. I didn't even know I had a video camera, but I didn't take any video on it. I just,
Fact,
got our cell phones.
I don't know what you're planning on doing up here in your next couple of days, but boy, if I was you, I'd incorporate that into your.
We'd have to regroup before we did that.
I know.
But yeah,
Here we go. It's the lust for gold.
But I do want to go run my metal detector around that one for fun.
Okay, where were we with Justin?
We were talking about his aliases.
Yeah, aliases.
Aliens.
But Captain Harrison Trow was his primary for 25 years. Okay? That's one he actually filled the shoes of.
Do we have any
William A.
history?
Clark, even though it was one of his primaries because of all the business that was attached to him, it was Carl Clark who played the part. So,
Do we have any history of Harrison Trow before he came into existence?
yeah,
One
entry at the Hudspeth farm.
Right. You
He
said
was 19 years old, and he was listed as a farmhand. There is no birth record. They claim they know who his parents are, but you can't find anything that connects a Harrison Trow to them.
Right.
Doesn't exist.
You would think if he was a farmhand who became a captain, there would be a pretty historical story behind that.
Well, I find this pretty funny, okay? Captain Harrison Trow's daughter, okay? Not Jesse's daughter, Captain Harrison Trow's daughter, when he supposedly died, when she filled out the birth certificate, there was these 2 lines that remained blank. And that's his mother's name, his father's name. How come she didn't know who her grandparents were?
She probably did.
She didn't know what to write.
Maybe she did. I don't know.
She had to wait for some genealogist of the future to speculate. Go, oh, here's a Trow. Yeah, well, yeah, that looks like him, so we'll use that name. They haven't found Captain Harrison Trow's mother or father. I don't care what Stanley Search or the other one says.
Family search is pretty accurate. I found that some of the old Spanish, Pedro Jose Salazar.
Mm-hmm.
I found Sylvester Prado. I found.
Here's what you have to do with family search. You have to go find the documents that supports that. And
Right.
if you go to a different page, you'll find the documentation. Sometimes it's just a personal story. Sometimes it's an actual record, a birth record, christening, marriage, whatever. It could be a census record.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you gotta go verify.
My fascination with Jesse James after that site is I want to know more information about him in the West. Because there's nothing in the West. Because you just can't find that information out there.
Actually, you can.
Well, maybe you can, but I'm unfamiliar with that.
You can too.
Okay.
It's in the black book.
Yeah, well, yeah. But is there other information about some of the things that exploits that possibly could have been his? Or cache sites. There's actually one cache site that talked about that was recovered.
Well, the Doc Noss story. There's another one that would be recovered. They know where the safe is, but they can't get it out of the mud. It's down in, I think, Louisiana, and I think there's another one in Texas. But it's just physically impossible to raise them up out of the bayou. So, I figure if they can send rockets into space every other day and bring them back.
You ought to be able to
There's a way.
You ought to be able to float them out. Like those ones that they float cars in.
Well, you got to get down through the mud first
To get to
it.
I know a guy.
I think I'll do some tunneling. But anyway, anything else?
Well, I don't know. You got any questions, John?